Please welcome to the stage, Brad Smith.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me here and us here this morning. I think we have a really important topic and a really important conversation. I'll kick it off. You'll hear from some others. We have a panel of people from around the country to have a conversation about what's going on around the country. The construction of data centers, AI infrastructure, really the infrastructure of our future. And I think this is a fitting time to have this conversation. Here we are, the second week of January, still a new year and not a typical year. 2026, the year the United States celebrates its 250th anniversary, its 250th year of independence. And in many ways, I think it is a good backdrop for this conversation. Because what we need to think about and talk about are the issues of the day, but also the issues for our country that have always been part of our country. Interestingly, we all know that George Washington was the father of our country in so many ways. There was a book written about him with the apt title, A Grand Idea. But the grand idea in this book was not the founding of a new nation. It was not the creation of a new republic. It was instead the first step in a 250-year history of building out the infrastructure of America. Because after General Washington had left the Army, after the war had ended, and before the Constitutional Convention, he held another post. In 1785, he became the president, the founder of a new company, the Potomac Canal Company. He saw a future where canals would open up the United States of America, where they went ahead and built the first stretch of the first canal near here in Great Falls, Virginia, something that people can still visit today. And in so many ways, our 250 years of history is not only an ongoing saga about democracy and the rights of people, but also technology. Technology that leads to infrastructure. Infrastructure that is driven by technology. It started with canals, the first wave, but then as new technologies came into use, many of them required infrastructure. The steam engine led to railroads, and railroads required railroad tracks. Electricity at the end of the 19th century required new power plants and the creation of an electrical grid. The telephone was useless without telephone lines. The automobile, the great invention that changed America forever, could not go very far unless there were roads and highways. And the airplane that probably brought you either to your most recent vacation or here to a business week in Washington would not even take off or land without airports. Infrastructure became part of the ongoing saga of America. But one of the enduring lessons, one of many, is that infrastructure expansion is always difficult. For the people who worked here in Washington, D.C., when Andrew Jackson was president in 1830, one of the debates of the spring and the summer is whether the revenue from tariffs would be used to pay for what were called internal improvements if they were confined to a single state. It was a political row. It led to a presidential veto. Decade after decade, century after century, infrastructure has always raised new questions, new concerns, new controversies, and yet throughout it all, it has been vital to the growth and prosperity of our nation. Perhaps the story of Dwight Eisenhower and the interstate highway system says as much about modern-day America as anything else. But if you put those waves together, we've lived through as a nation 6 waves of technology and infrastructure expansion, and here we are. Here we are on the 250th anniversary of our country, the first month of the second quarter of the 21st century, and we are embarking again on what is the seventh wave of technology that demands investments in new infrastructure. More powerful chips, bigger buildings, more electricity, new advances in liquid cooling, broadband connectivity, many, many different technologies that come together to build the AI infrastructure that will create the next foundation for American growth and prosperity. And yet, as before, the public, not surprisingly, has questions. When we listen to communities around the country, when I visit communities around the country, people have questions, pointed questions, they even have concerns. They are the type of questions that we need to heed. Because one of the lessons of the past applies to the present and speaks to the future. The truth is, infrastructure build-outs progress only when communities conclude that the benefits outweigh the costs. And we are at a moment in time when people have a lot on their mind. They're worried about the price of electricity. They wonder what this big data center will mean to their water supply. They look at this technology and ask, what will it mean for the jobs of the future? What will it mean for the adults working today? What will it mean for their children? All of these are more than legitimate. And we are here today for one reason above all else, because we are at a moment in time when we need to listen and we need to address these concerns head on. In short, as a sector, as an industry, as a country, and community by community, we need to raise the bar. And here at Microsoft, we're focused first and foremost on raising it on ourselves to address the issues that people care about. That's why we're launching today a national initiative, but it's really about a national initiative that unfolds in specific communities. For us, the communities across the country where we build, own, and operate data centers. We call it our Community First AI Infrastructure Plan, and it has 5 pieces. It's designed to address the 5 issues that we hear the most about: electricity, water, jobs, taxes, and skills. 5 issues that matter in every local community. So let me walk you through what we are pledging to do. In each of these 5 areas, we offer each community where we build, own, and operate these data centers a straightforward pledge, backed by action. The first is electricity. Our pledge to each of these communities is that we will pay our way as a company to ensure that our data centers don't increase your electricity prices. This is what we have concluded we need to do in order to continue to build and invest and contribute in a responsible way. And I think we all need to recognize, obviously, electricity prices have been rising. They've been rising for many reasons, including several years of inflation that have ultimately resulted in utility commissions changing electricity rates. The real question is, how do we deliver on this promise? It really has 4 parts. First, we will pay utility rates that are high enough to cover our electricity costs, in part by collaborating with utilities on plans to add the electricity supply that we will need. The truth is, demand for electricity is growing. AI infrastructure and data centers are a part of that growth and demand. They are far from the majority of that cost, but they do matter, especially in a local community where a data center is being built or expanded. And we recognize, for example, that our data center may well require investments in the local transmission capability of the grid or in substation improvements. That is a benefit to us. It is a cost that we should bear. as we work things out with the local utility and utility commission. There may need to be additional generation capacity to put more electricity on the grid so that we and others can access it. And by collaborating closely with utilities, we will share our estimates of the amount of electricity we will need. We will work with utilities so that we sign in advance so that they know that they can afford to make these investments. And we will couple that with more work to make our data centers more efficient and to champion the kinds of public policies that are needed for not just these communities, but for the state and the country more broadly. To improve the efficiency of our grid as a national asset, as an indispensable foundation for everyday life. And we will use our technology, AI, to help drive efficiencies in electricity. We will build on the work we have already started. For example, in Wisconsin, where we have our Fairwater 1, one of our biggest and most advanced data centers, we've worked with We Energies, the local utility provider. They have proposed a special electric rate for data centers for very large customers. It is a tariff structure that will increase the price of electricity for Microsoft, and we have gone to bat to support that. We do support that, and we are asking the Public Utility Commission in Wisconsin to raise our rates to protect consumers. Because I think the bare minimum as we look to the future is to give these communities around the country the confidence that when a data center comes, its presence will not raise their electricity prices. Now, interestingly, as important as electricity is, for such obvious reasons, given the large amount of electricity that data centers use, I've increasingly found over the last year that when I talk with folks in a data center community, they have just as many questions about water as electricity. And so the second pledge that we are making in each of these communities is that we will minimize our water use and we will replenish more of your water than we will use. Here too, there are multiple steps that we will take. The first is to reduce the water used in our data centers. Our goal is to reduce the water intensity of our data centers across the country by 40% between now and the end of the decade. And technology is helping. You may think that at a technology company like Microsoft, everybody's focused on writing code and creating AI and developing software that you can use, and that is why we go to work in the morning. But the reality is that our researchers and research labs are also focused on new technologies like new forms of liquid cooling in a closed loop so that the liquid needed to cool the chips is constantly recirculated and hence doesn't draw more water from the community. So we will reduce our own water use. But more than that, we will replenish more water in each community than we use. What does that mean? Well, think about it like a bank account. We withdraw water. If we use it, we will redeposit water to add it to the water supply. And I'll talk a little bit about how we do that. We also know that we need to be more transparent. We will be more transparent as a company, providing data in each local community where we build and own and operate these data centers about how we're doing when it comes to meeting our water goals. Because I think in the past, data centers were built mostly without a lot of communication in a local community. Land was bought under non-disclosure agreements because as soon as somebody knew that a big company was in town, the price of land would skyrocket. And that created a culture in our industry that we need to evolve and change, where we as a company lean in to share more and talk more with the local community and to advocate more for the public policies that are needed as well. I think a fascinating example of what it means to replenish water comes from a part of the country where we have been operating data centers, a part of the country where water is far from plentiful. Arizona. What we have done there is build on our water replenishment work by working with the municipality, working with them to identify where their water pipes in their water system have leaks, where they're losing water. We are spending our money to invest to enable the municipality to fix those leaks and protect its water supply. And it's not just those kinds of steps. We also take similar steps that are more nature-based, that focus on watersheds to help restore them, as we have in southeastern Wisconsin. So in part because of the climate work we've been doing this last decade, because of our global goal to be water positive by the end of this decade, we've developed a capability that we can put to work and reach this goal of water positive, not just on a planetary or national basis, but in each of these specific data center communities. The third thing we'll focus on is jobs. And our pledge to these local communities is we will create jobs for your residents. And I think there's two parts of this that are very important. First is the number and nature of the jobs, and the second is who gets the jobs when they are filled. The first is something that people talk about a lot. Everybody knows that when a construction project is underway, it can employ thousands of people. And people may look at a data center and say, there's a crane and there's a bulldozer, but most of the jobs, in fact, are skilled labor, skilled craft jobs, especially for electricians and pipe fitters with all of that liquid cooling. And people also know that when the construction phase is over, there are fewer jobs. But there's two things to remember. When we have a major data center site, the construction can last for more than a decade because we constantly expand. And even when that construction is over, we have hundreds of jobs, often in small towns. Jobs that involve not only the skilled labor like electricians and electrical engineers, not only pipe fitters and mechanical engineers, but technology jobs and network security jobs. But the real question that people often have in local communities is who's going to get these jobs? We need to lean in as a company and as an industry so that the people who live in a community can see an opportunity for their kids, for their relatives, for their friends to fill these jobs. And what that requires is an investment in skilling, to equip people with the ability to fill those jobs. And so that's why we're investing in new partnerships, first to train local construction workers, but also for the ongoing jobs for our data centers. Through our Data Center Academy program, which often partners with a community college to train individuals in the local community so they can fill those jobs. And to encourage policymakers, not just in local communities and counties and states, but at the national level to recognize the current reality, which is that we have a national shortage of skilled labor. Not just because we, in some ways, disinvested in the trades, but because the workforce is aging, because the demand for this labor is now rising, and there is a gap that can be filled and create a new opportunity for people across the country. One of the most exciting steps we're taking is one we're announcing today with NAB2. With our partnership, we will work together to provide NAB2 with early visibility to where we see the need to expand, to work together on apprenticeship programs and training to create more opportunities for more people to fill these jobs. The fourth issue is taxes. And specifically, we have a pledge to each community on this too. We will add to the tax base that funds your local hospitals, your schools, your parks and libraries. And this has two critical elements. The first is we will not go into a local community and ask them to create a local property tax reduction or abatement in order to attract a data center from Microsoft. We recognize that this is one of the vital ways in which the addition of a data center or the expansion of a data center can add to the economic vitality of the community. And we will recognize that this is the community's resource, that the community needs to apply to meet its broad needs, not to benefit us and our facility, but to benefit everybody. And I think in some ways, this is the great reality that we've had the opportunity to experience firsthand as a company because we've been building data centers for over 15 years. And I think no place better illustrates this than the small town where Microsoft built its first data center, and it has now built 20 data centers in Quincy, Washington, about 150 miles east of Seattle. As somebody who has now lived in the state of Washington for almost 3 decades, one of the things that impresses me is that if you want to visit what is probably the nicest high school building in the state of Washington, you don't go to the neighborhood where Microsoft's headquarters is based. You don't go next door to Amazon, you go to Quincy. And you'll see their public high school. You'll see their brand new medical facility, a facility with more than 50,000 square feet that has opened at a time when most rural communities are struggling just to keep their medical centers open. If you go to Quincy, Washington, there's 2 other things that you may not be able to see when you walk down the street, but they are critical to everyday reality. You will see a community where over the last 15 years, property tax revenue has tripled from about $60 million a year to $180 million a year. That is what is funding all of these improvements. But you know what else you will see? You will see something that does not exist very broadly in this country. You will see a place where the people living below the poverty line has been cut in half in the last 15 years, from just shy of 30% to just over 13%. With the right stewardship and the right commitment, we fundamentally believe that data centers can fuel economic prosperity, not for the few, but for everybody in a community that depends on these schools and these hospitals and all of these other public services and jobs. We believe in it because we've been part of it, because we've seen it and we've helped create it. And we believe that this is something with the right perspective, with the broad approach, we can bring to other communities as well. And finally, we're focused on skilling and the community as a whole. Our final pledge is that we will strengthen your community by investing in local AI training and nonprofits. We created last summer a new part of Microsoft, Microsoft Elevate. It works with nonprofits and K-12 schools and community colleges all around the world. And with this resource and our other capabilities, we will partner with schools. The schools and community colleges and other colleges and universities in these data center communities to provide them with access to the best AI training we can offer. We'll provide AI training and tools for the adults by creating AI learning labs in local libraries. We'll support AI skilling programs for local businesses, and we will invest in local nonprofits. We've been doing some of this in some places. One of the places we've been doing it is our largest data center campus east of the Mississippi in Southern Virginia, in Mecklenburg County, where we've not only built a data center campus, but have been partnering with the community colleges, the higher education center, to provide more skills training to more people. And we will harness the energy that we've created as a company with and for our own employees to get involved in the community. In my own opinion, one of the best benefits of being an employee at Microsoft, when you think broadly, is the support that we provide for our employees to get engaged. Every time a Microsoft employee volunteers 1 hour for a nonprofit, Microsoft donates $25 to that nonprofit. Last year, our employees volunteered just shy of 1 million hours. Every time a Microsoft employee donates $1 to a nonprofit, Microsoft will match it with another $1. And that donation program, including the volunteerism, generated last year in this country alone $229 million. And we will combine this with other and expanded programs to support nonprofits. So put together, we believe this is the type of step we need to take. I think it's the right thing to do from a civic perspective, to be civically responsible, but let's also face it, it's the right and smart thing to do from a business perspective as well. Because we need to recognize that this generation of new infrastructure is in so many ways like every generation in the past, but in some ways is even moving faster than technology has ever moved before. And we need to recognize that this is an issue not only for the nation, but for many local communities as well. As all of you who work in this town know, at the end of the day, all politics is local to a significant degree. And the truth is, when you have a national infrastructure wave underway, progress requires decisions at the national and the local level. It requires leadership from the President of the United States, as President Trump has provided recently, not only in the National AI Plan, but as recently as last evening, as he has made clear quite rightly, in my view, that we need to stand up and step up as an industry and ensure that we pay the tab for things like the cost of electricity data centers will need. But as I've also found on many occasions, that as important as the President of the United States is on almost everything, when it comes to a data center, sometimes it's the President of the Village Council that is more important still. It's the leadership of a fellow like Dave DeGroot, the President of the Village of Mount Pleasant. Without his leadership, southeastern Wisconsin would not have one of the most advanced AI infrastructure facilities on planet Earth. But ultimately, as you all know, this requires not just new infrastructure. It requires not just new investments. It requires relationships. It requires people who engage in the community. It requires companies that can do a good job of breaking down the barriers to transparency so we can share more information and not just share, but listen and learn. The truth is, the progress that the future requires can be built, must be built, on one ingredient above all else. It needs to be built on trust. That is never built in a day. It's never built with just the unveiling of a plan. It's built by ensuring that our deeds match our words, that we listen and we learn, that we evolve what we do, and we meet local community needs. That is what we're committed to doing. And that's what we'll take from this room in this city to data center communities across the country. Thank you very much. So let me introduce the next speaker, who happens to be from southeastern Wisconsin, but works in your zip code. Brian Stile, the congressman who represents the first district of Wisconsin, who was first elected in 2018 after working in manufacturing for a manufacturer in Beloit, a town where by coincidence I lived 3 years as a very young child. He also has the district that has our data center in Mount Pleasant, Wisconsin, where by coincidence I also spent 4 years growing up as a kid. One of the things I've always appreciated when I talk to Brian is the degree to which he has his finger on the pulse of what has been a constantly changing part of the country, from agriculture to manufacturing to automobile assembly to the future of data centers. As you probably know better than me, he also is a leader in the House of Representatives, where he is the chair of the House Administration Committee. But as somebody who grew up in his district, as somebody who benefited from getting our family dog from the farm that is now on the site where our data center sits, I got to tell you, it always makes me smile to see that the place I grew up is represented by somebody so capable. Please join me in welcoming Congressman Brian Stein.
Thank you very much. Brad, thank you very much. 250 years of history in the United States of America. And what makes our country unique is when business leaders, civic leaders, and elected leaders come together to address the biggest challenges of the day. The challenge we're facing today is AI is coming online. How we build out the infrastructure is a new challenge, but it mirrors and parallels many of the challenges this country has seen before. And when those three groups, civic leaders, business leaders, and elected leaders, are able to successfully come together, we have seen incredible success in the United States. Sometimes I reflect back on previous evolutions of technology. And one of my favorites is actually going back and reading a 1978 New York Times article that says cash robots will end all teller jobs. Now note, 1978 is before I was born, but bear with. It was an understanding of how technology in the ATM was going to completely disrupt tens of thousands of tellers across the United States of America. And you read the article, and it's actually pretty well written, except it's completely wrong in its conclusion. Because what would really happen over time is that the number of tellers would actually increase in the United States, and the wages that they would earn would actually increase in real terms. And so if you look back, it's leveraging that technology and embracing that technology in a thoughtful and structured way to the benefit of workers and communities across the United States. And I applaud you, Brad, and for Microsoft for laying out the plan that you have, because I've seen firsthand how this can work really well. It can also work really poorly. And we've seen that also play out as technology has evolved. But as you look at the forward-thinking plan that's laid out here, I think there is an amazing opportunity, not just nationally, but in particular in real communities that impacts real people. I think in particular about the tax that Brad laid out about not asking for discounts, but stepping up and playing the civic role that businesses need to play in our community. But let me scale this for you. He referenced Mount Pleasant. It's the township just outside the city of Racine. The city of Racine is 75,000 people. And I pulled up and said, if you took the housing stock in the entire city of Racine, the entire assessed value of 75,000 people in this community of Racine, what's the assessed value of every single residential property in the city? It's $4.2 billion. Microsoft has already invested $3 billion with an announced plan of $7 billion. Microsoft was the largest single taxpayer in Racine County last year. And so if we think about the impact that businesses like Microsoft can have, that leveraging the AI revolution can have, they're real and substantive. And they're real and substantive and think in two ways. One, reducing the tax burden, which is always a good thing, but also investing in a lot of the resources that communities need, from transportations to hospitals and others. People will benefit by increasing the tax base in our communities. The other aspect that you referenced, Brad, that I think is incredibly important is the real human impact that this has, not just in the abstract, but in real terms. I was home a couple of weeks ago, and I ran into a buddy of mine that I went to high school with. He's a union electrician in Janesville, Wisconsin. Janesville is about a 90-minute drive across over to Racine. And he's a union electrician. He said, Brian, I actually just started a job. They're building this data center over near Racine. I don't know if you know about it. And he drives back and forth because the wages that are being paid at the Racine facility are so significant it's worth his commute back and forth. In getting more and more young men and women into the trades as union electricians, as pipe fitters, as other positions, creates a huge opportunity for jobs in our community. In training and making sure that people have the skills to benefit from these types of jobs is a new challenge, but also it's a challenge that we've seen for many years. Racine, Wisconsin, as you may or may not know, is actually the home of the first ever technical college in the United States of America. In 1911, the community in the Racine area came together and placed a tax burden upon themselves to allow individuals to go to technical college. And why did they do that? Farming was going through a massive evolution. Case Tractor is headquartered, Case IH is headquartered in downtown Racine now, but they were beginning to produce tractors. And so the labor demand on farms was coming down. But the new jobs were now located in the city that required a new and different skill set that many incredibly hardworking young men and women would have. The community came together and created the first ever technical college, which would then be replicated across the country. In the investment in our education programs to make sure that those people in our own communities have the skill set to be able to benefit by the AI revolution is absolutely critical. And so as we reflect back, there is a huge opportunity here that we can get right or we can get wrong. And the forward and structured thinking of civic leaders, of elected leaders, and of business leaders to make sure that we get this right is absolutely essential. And so, Brad, I applaud you and Microsoft for stepping up with the plan that you have today. And I know you're leaving here and going to Wisconsin. So congratulations, and I'm jealous that you'll be in Wisconsin before me. But this is all about getting it right. Not getting it right just on the bottom line, just where the business leaders win. Not getting it right just where the elected officials win. But getting it right where everyone in the United States comes out ahead for the fact that this technological revolution is coming to us, and we can harness it to the benefit of the United States of America. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Brad.
And please welcome to the stage Mike Monroe, Chief of Staff, North America's Building Trades Unions.
Morning, everybody, and thanks for having me. First, just want to give it up for Brad for his presentation, the team here. He's put together a good event. Thank you all for coming. Thank you for having us. As was stated, Mike Monroe, Chief of Staff, North America's Building Trades Unions. Thrilled to be here representing the building trades and to highlight this partnership here that some of what Brad spoke to. So again, thank you. Thank Brad, his team. I'd be remiss if I did not thank also the work that predates this convening with the AFL-CIO and Liz Schuler and her leadership. So again, thank you for the work that you and your team have put together. And again, you know, I was driving in here today and on the shuffle came in, I guess fortuitously, something that came to mind in framing my remarks here. And as Brad laid out, you know, we have a lot to do to build trust in the communities. This is a scary time for a lot of folks, and now we're introducing new technologies, and there's an open question as to whether or not these technologies will pass them by, if these technologies help further their advancement. And so, as I remarked, and I was driving in, I heard, as it were, the Isley brothers, work to do, and we have work to do. And in the building trades, we run towards that work. We don't shy away from it. And who we are is a federation, NAB2, a federation of construction unions, painters, bricklayers, sheet metal workers, iron workers, operating engineers, teamsters, pipe fitters, electricians, laborers, and others. And what we do is best in class, right? We train, equip, and deploy the highest, most skilled, most productive workforce in the world. Our workers, our members, through collective bargaining with our contractor partners, have set up a sustainable workforce development model that's the envy of the world. 1,900 training centers throughout the United States, $2 billion annually invested in craft training, ongoing craft training. And with partners like Microsoft, we're able to plan for the future so we can deploy that craft in a strategic way, right? And so what we're here today to talk about, again, is the future and workers' place in it. And again, we're thrilled, representing the building trades, that Microsoft is oriented the way they are. Not all companies are speaking like them. Certainly not all companies are acting like them. And for those that are concerned about what the future holds and their stake in it, know that a partnership on the front end with the building trades is a window into that world. It is a first critical step into building trust within the community, making sure folks are listening, instilling those listening sessions, if you will, into action, and to making sure these investments are equitable and sustainable and provide value. So again, a commercial about the building trades, we've been doing this for over 100 plus years. We are not new to this. We are prepared for these moments. In fact, we have been preparing for these build-outs for over a decade now, specifically as it relates to data centers. And yes, there are external players and internal players that are involved, and we do, on all levels of it, the building trades will be engaged, whether it's our direct partnership with Microsoft, our direct partnership as representatives of the community and in the community, and yes, in public policy. Because as was stated, and again, to be commended for your foresight and your commitments here, there are drains on energy sources, on water sources, and being a good corporate steward, if you will, and embracing that challenge and addressing it and committing to doing it in an equitable manner is something that we are thrilled to be a part of. I will say public policy right now, just to take a step back on what it is we do, building trades build everything that you can see in the physical world, right? Affordable housing, energy systems, the grid, infrastructure is a word we go to bed dreaming about, right? And so this is now a moment where, yes, policymakers can choose which side they're on and who to support. We're all the above in the building trades. All energy systems, oil and gas, nuclear, renewables, offshore wind. It's lamentable that certain things have become political footballs, picking winners and losers. When it comes to this piece of business, we know we cannot pick winners and losers. We certainly need all energy systems, and the building trades will be building that as well. So in partnership with Microsoft, the opportunity that's been provided us, we're thrilled to do what it is we do best, and that is to put working men and women on the front lines to help build these things, maintain these facilities, and represent their communities in so doing. So as we move forward, we have work to do, but this is an important first step to engaging with the community, hearing the concerns of the community, enveloping their interests, and making sure that this enterprise brings value to their daily lives. And so we're thrilled at the partnership, we're thrilled at the opportunity, we are looking forward to the work ahead, and in fact, our teams are meeting next week to dive into what was referenced as our memorandum of understanding, where we're talking about the pipeline of work, the expectation of the build-out, what it will take from communities, and yes, from the building trades, the men and women of the building trades, to help have a successful enterprise. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here. Thank you for the partnership. We're in our early stages, and we're ready to roll up our sleeves and do our work. Thank you all for being here, for the members of Congress that have come to support this endeavor. And we look forward to continually engaging the community, continually being good stewards of those communities, and bringing value everywhere we go. So again, thank you on behalf of the building trades. Thank you for being here, and looking forward to the work ahead, Brad. Thank you.
Our panel will begin momentarily.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Rima Alaili. I'm a general counsel at Microsoft, and I work with our infrastructure business. Thank you all. For this last segment, we're going to switch gears and do something different, have a discussion. The growth of infrastructure in cities, towns, and villages across the country raises important questions for those communities. Who pays? Who benefits? And how do we ensure that local systems are protected rather than stressed? Today's panel is really meant to ground those questions in real community experiences. And we're joined by local leaders from Wyoming, Virginia, and Central Washington who are here to talk about what works, what feels hard, and what community first looks like in practice. So I have with me today Wes Aston, who is the Vice President of South Dakota and Wyoming Utilities at Black Hills Energy, overseeing electric and natural gas services for over 250,000 customers across 100 different communities. Dr. Sue Kane, who is the CEO of North Central Washington Tech Alliance, leading regional strategy at the intersection of technology, workforce development, and community impact across rural Washington state. And Brian Stone, who is the Deputy Director of the Department of Utilities for the town of Leesburg, Virginia, the state's largest incorporated town with approximately 50,000 residents. He oversees operations, engineering, and construction of the town's water and sewer infrastructure. So let's start, Wes, with you. Wyoming is often raised as an example of how electricity demand from data centers can be managed responsibly. Microsoft and Black Hills Utility work together on a tariff and a series of contractual arrangements to do that. Could you walk us through, just at a high level, because this stuff can get complex, about how the partnership structure with Microsoft works, and specifically how electricity to support data center growth was planned so that local customers weren't exposed to higher costs or reliability risks?
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And good morning. Thank you for having us. It's great to be here today. Black Hills Energy has been a very grateful partner, and been thrilled with our relationship with Microsoft as it's developed over more than a decade. Essentially, when Microsoft came to town more than 12 years ago, it was going to be a new large customer that we were very excited to have. And after a couple years of service and that relationship building, we began to see that Microsoft had a desire to continue to grow in that area. Cheyenne is a great place for data centers, very high altitude, low humidity, near some population bases, and so we wanted to find a way to grow that partnership. What we ended up doing was working with Microsoft, working with our governor, working with our local leaders in the community, and we essentially got a law passed, legislation passed to allow for a different style for utility treatment for large customers. And that allowed us to file a tariff in front of the Wyoming Commission that essentially sets up a framework for large customers to be able to get service in a different way than other utilities. It segregates out how those services are delivered and makes sure that they're not borne by citizens that are our ratepayers.
Now, I understand that part of the structure also meant that Microsoft would pay for incremental infrastructure costs. Can you say a little bit more about that and what that entailed?
Yeah, when we started this process to say, how would this look? What would the framework look like for a different setup for a utility? And this really, even a decade later, is still one of the most innovative rates we've seen across the country. It set up a framework to have a win-win-win, that Microsoft needed to have the power and they needed to have control of their generation portfolio, what that power looked like, where that reliability would come from, including behind the meter generation. And then if we were able to acquire power for Microsoft on the open market, we could offset some of our needs to build generation to grow. And so that kept customer rates down. We were able to do that in a way that helps grow our infrastructure, grow our tax base, grow our load, but did not happen on the backs of other customers.
That's fantastic. Now, one of the other elements, as I understand it, of the tariff and the contractual arrangements that were put in place ensures that local customers actually receive the lowest cost power first. Yep. How does that work? And how does that impact then what those customers actually end up paying?
You know, one of the visions I think really came to fruition over that time was in order to make this successful for the community. I think Microsoft saw early on they wanted to make sure that they were a long-term viable partner. And so by having in statute, in the tariffs, that any cost that customers had would be the lowest cost. So if we were going out to acquire market power, we would make sure the cheapest power available went to our customers first, our residential retail customers, and that Microsoft would take on additional power beyond that. So we prioritized our retail customers in a partnership with Microsoft.
When you do kind of the planning for energy use over a long period of time, the forecasting, data centers can have fluctuations. Things can change, business can change, there are spikes, there are increases, there are decreases. How do you work with Microsoft? How do you collaborate in order to make sure that you can do the kind of planning you need to avoid any kind of unexpected surprises?
Yeah, the partnership with Microsoft has been something that I think we take great pride in, and it's only because of the maturity of the company and their willingness to be candid. And so we've had a transparent relationship where we can understand what is the long-term vision, what is the forecast. And forecasts change as the business climate changes. So we will work to continue to update what is the expectations for service and that long-term roadmap for being able to deliver that power, whether that's acquisition of power in the market, whether that's building generation company-owned, whether that's building generation private-owned. All those things come together to come up with an agreed-to long-term plan.
That's great. So it's very clear from what you're talking about that really when companies like Microsoft, data center developers can work together with the utility, we can figure out and problem solve ways in which growth can be accommodated without imposing the costs on customers.
Yeah, I would say, and attest to the comments that Brad made earlier today, we've seen over more than a decade of service to Microsoft that we've seen in our community. Tax base has grown, jobs have grown for our community. We've seen the overall cost of providing service because the electric grid is a large engine with ongoing cost, and we've seen as a larger share of those costs have gone to a company or a large company, then we've seen residential costs be able to stay flat or even decrease, and that's a benefit to everybody.
And so those large load customers act almost like an anchor and a tenant in a shopping mall in some sense to make that shopping mall viable.
I think
in
that's
the same
great.
way. So let me just switch and head over to Brian over on the end there. Brian, water is a concern we hear frequently, as Brad mentioned, especially in fast-growing regions. When Microsoft proposed building a data center in Leesburg, Virginia, I know the water system needed some upgrades to accommodate kind of what that data center was going to need. And we worked together to make sure that the added growth wouldn't put strain on the residents. And I want to unpack with you just briefly how that happened. So how did you partner with Microsoft to determine, first of all, what investments were going to be needed?
Okay, well, as a water utility, it's important for us to understand our system, similar to electricity, because water is distributed almost like a grid in a sense. So we've got a distribution network, and understanding that system is really important for us because we actually have a model of it so that we can plug in demands from, like for Microsoft, for instance, and understand the impacts elsewhere in the system, at other places, and pressure drops and those sorts of things. We can understand that as through this model that we've created. So in working with Microsoft on the water side, we pulled our water model out, we took it out, and we modeled the Microsoft demand on the system to understand some of those impacts. And we had two impacts on the water system that we recognized. One is we needed a better connection. We call it a loop connection because presently Microsoft is served in the data center by what we call a dead end in the system. Okay, so we're connecting that dead end back to the system so we can effectively get bi-directional flow, I'll say. That really makes the system more robust and more resilient for us. Okay, so that's one of the things that we identified that we needed to have done. Another thing was we needed some upgrades to our water booster pump station. That was identified as well, and we're working with Microsoft on that. And then the last thing, we saw some upgrades were needed at one of our wastewater pump stations, which Microsoft, we coordinated with them for that additional capacity from their discharge to the wastewater pump station. Now, your question, Rima, was about how do we coordinate that. I met with Microsoft a lot, and I met with the Microsoft team very closely and coordinated with them, communicated with them. This is our system, and there is a delta here in what we can do and what you need. So we worked with them, we identified that delta and communicated with them, understood their needs, and we captured it all in an agreement that was executed about 2 months ago. It's an infrastructure agreement. And that was key for us, is getting that signed, and now we're moving forward with those projects.
And how are those projects getting paid for? Is Microsoft contributing to those costs? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Okay, so that loop, waterline loop that I spoke of earlier, Microsoft is paying 100% of that cost, and that's roughly $2 million or $2.5 million in construction. We prorated the other projects because they weren't all related to capacity. And it's not, and we felt it was not fair for Microsoft to pay for something that wasn't really totally related to their work. So the wastewater pump station is valued at 87% is paid by Microsoft. The other 13% is paid for by the town because that's really maintenance-related work that we were going to have to do anyway. And then the water booster pump station is around $500,000 has been identified for Microsoft in that.
So it sounds like at the end of the day, what we have is a real win-win, where Microsoft gets upgrades that are essential to support its data center development, but the community also gets some new assets that ultimately end up strengthening the water system and improving its reliability and robustness.
Exactly.
So let's switch then to people and Sue. Infrastructure is not just about pipes and wires, and I think it's really, in many cases, about people, as Brad was saying a little bit earlier. You're from work out of Central Washington, Quincy, where Microsoft, as Brad mentioned, has a number of data centers, and a number of other tech companies have moved in and also built data centers there. And work with the Tech Alliance, which ultimately builds durable pathways into tech and data center careers through skilling and training programs. With that perspective, that experience and that perspective, can you help us understand a little bit more what is the opportunities that data centers offer in places like Quincy, Washington?
Yeah, and I have to say, the people infrastructure is the part I want to focus on, but I'll reiterate that what Wes and Brian suggested in the entry part or the starting part of the data center has been our experience, and we're much farther down the road. We've had data centers in our communities now for a couple of decades, and the partnership that they're experiencing now has been consistent. Microsoft has showed up in every aspect of development of the infrastructure, in both the water and the power and the people. And when we talk about the data centers, one of the most frequent questions that we get is, what kind of jobs are in there anyway? These are very large, they're nondescript buildings for very good reason, because they're maintaining critical infrastructure and data for healthcare systems and financial systems and all sorts of other really important data and information. And those facilities are large, and the rumor, the misconception is that there are not very many jobs once the construction is done. We are well past the initial phase of construction, but as was suggested this morning, the construction never stops. I frequently hold up my cell phone and say, we get a new one of these every 2 or 3 years, and this is just something that you keep as a personal device. Imagine now that your entire operation has to have technology, and how often you will want to update that, upgrade that, improve that. They're not the same shapes, sizes, materials. They get more efficient, and every time they're upgraded, that requires new wiring, new pipes, new fitting of that infrastructure. So they have not yet stopped construction. And the jobs that are in those facilities, I will often have the conversation with community leaders to say, all right, let's gut check that estimate that you have, because they'll say, what, there's like 20 people in that big building. That doesn't actually make sense. Let's imagine that it's your job to staff that big building behind us. You have to keep it running 24/7, 365. It can never go down. It can never lose power. It can never be offline, because those are people's devices and their connectivity. All of those applications that you use today ran through a data center. My children's photos are in there, right? We need to make sure that that never turns off. How many people will you want? 24/7, 365. You need security. If there's some kind of a power disruption, you need to get it back online. It doesn't gut check to say there's not enough jobs there. In our conversations, we've done some mapping and some proxies to be able to measure, because there are many different employers working as a network to maintain a data center. So it's very difficult. And we use the analogy, it's kind of like a mall. If you went to the mall and said, how many jobs do you have in there? They would say, we don't know. You have to go ask our tenants. In the same way, that conglomerate of employers that are working behind a data center don't always have a quick response when you ask them how many jobs are in there. But when you use a proxy like how many people badge into your secure facility 3 or more days a week, 4 hours or more a time, and maybe we count that as a job, that estimate gets us anywhere from 200 to 400 per site. And we have dozens of those data centers now. We have thousands of my neighbors and friends who work in data centers. They're not a small number of jobs. They're a major part of our local economy. It's a rural economy. So that idea that there are not jobs and sustained jobs is a misconception. It's really understandable how we get there, but that's not accurate.
Can you talk just a little bit about, for an agricultural community like Quincy, these jobs are on-ramps into the technology industry. What kind of impact does that have on the people who get these jobs? And particularly given the fact that many of these jobs can be, attained with, high school education and then some additional training and certification. So you don't need to go to a 4-year college or have a graduate degree to start working at a Microsoft data center. So can you speak a little bit to what kind of impact that's had on people that you've worked with?
Yeah. So Quincy, Washington is an agricultural community, and most of the parent generation have come from laboring roles in agriculture, small businesses, very small community. The data centers have given an opportunity for employment that surpasses, at entry-level wages, surpasses what students' parents were making in a year, in their very first year. And thanks to Microsoft and the work that they've been doing for the last decade, we've expanded access to computer science education and technology classes. It went almost like wildfire. We started in 2016 with 1 school, and the next year there were 4 schools, and the next year there were 17 schools. We've now for several years had computer science education in every high school in North Central Washington, not just Quincy. And then the same kind of skilling and development of that pathway happened at our community technical colleges, where the community technical colleges had opportunities for grants and faculty training and curriculum design. We've been connected with a network of national organizations that are providing input and resources there as well. And the pathway that we launched in 2023 with Quincy High School, they take career and tech ed classes for 2 years at the high school, and then they finish a certificate with 1 year at the community technical college. And they are then skilled with the foundational technology certificates that are recognized across the entire industry. So not just data centers, but the IT for our hospitals or our public utilities or smaller organizations that need IT professionals as well. That same certificate gets students in the door at the data centers to be able to work as a data center technician. Those are really interesting career starts because they have a skill set that is so durable, and they're able to transfer that into careers that are as wild and varied as the student interests are. They can be entrepreneurial, they can go work in a hospital, they can go work in higher ed. We've even got one of the students who came back, and he's now teaching the computer science class at Quincy High School. So
Fantastic.
Completed that pathway and went and is back teaching.
So let me ask, what has been most important in making the opportunities real and not just aspirational for rural communities? Or as Representative Stiles said, what do we need to do to make sure we're getting it right when we go in?
it is really important for folks to understand that working alongside Microsoft is not transactional. It is a relational partnership. It is a systems level approach. They are the kind of partner and the kind of builder that thinks about things like putting in upgrades to a water facility to benefit the residents as well as the facility. They come alongside and think about the emerging workforce and work with K-12 and colleges. We've also seen incumbent workforce investments, skills training. Some of the programs that NCW Tech Alliance runs helps people to access technology, and we're doing a lot of AI skilling with small businesses to be able to unlock the potential that they'll have. And that's a really important thing to know, is that it is a systems level investment in the infrastructure and in the people.
I think one of the things Microsoft has done is measure AI diffusion in various parts of the country. And I think Eastern Washington has one of the highest levels, due in large part to the work of the Tech Alliance. I think you're even outstripping us over on the west side of the state. So it's great work. I think just to close, I wanted to ask just one last question of each of you. If another community were facing data center development today, what's one thing you would emphasize to them, or a piece of advice you'd have? Maybe Wes, if we start with you.
In my opinion, and getting to see how the electric partnership has prospered over 20 years in the industry, we've seen an opportunity for electric companies to partner, and Microsoft has really set that standard. And to some of the comments you've heard, Microsoft came in and set a position that they wanted to build not a transactional relationship, but a long-term relationship with the partners in that community. Not just the utility provider, not just get a deal done, but really to invest and reinvest, not only in charitable organizations, but there is anyone from the mayor of Cheyenne to our partners in government. They can name off half a dozen to a dozen names at Microsoft of folks that they're working with. It's actually a people-based partnership and a relationship. And so it really was establishing trust and then establishing a vision for a long-term set on alignment of priorities. And that's really made everyone prosper.
How about you, Brian?
One word: communicate. We have to understand, as a utility, I have to understand our system and our capacity. Pipeline capacity, treatment capacity, those things. On Microsoft, from them, I need to understand what their needs are. And I need to communicate that. Understand the delta, if there is one. And if I need to make up something, how do we do that? How do we get there?
Sue, you want to close this out?
Yeah, I mean, I want to emphasize the relationship between the AI and data centers. And this may be coming from a farm town where our food doesn't arrive in grocery stores, it starts in a farm. You know, our AI technology that we love, it doesn't start at your device. It starts in a data center. And it gives me great confidence to know that those data centers are being maintained by my neighbors and my friends, and that I can point at where that facility is. We do get a lot of really great benefits from having data centers in our community. But from the standpoint of there will not be a world where there is less AI. As magical and big as this moment feels, there will only be more. There will be new versions of it. There will be new opportunities that come out, but there will only be more than there is right now. And if we're going to continue to grow in that space, it's to our best interest to have that be domestic. It's to our best interest to be able to have the opportunity for those jobs. The energy and the water and the infrastructure is a really important, significant challenge. But I can't think of a better partner to be in those kinds of significant challenges than a Microsoft. You know, we want to be able to figure out those things. And when we do figure those things out, I'll leave you with just maybe one more example if I've got 30 seconds. I'm in Washington State. Washington State has some of the dams, the hydro dams, the infrastructure that powered much of the West Coast at this point. But what most people don't know is that when they created the dams, it also created the irrigation system. And the irrigation system is what created agriculture. It's why I have the communities that I have to be able to serve and support. It's why Washington apples are iconic, right? It's the new opportunities that emerge when we make that initial investment in infrastructure, create new expanded opportunities that we haven't yet imagined what they are. And I think when I get overwhelmed by the complexity of some of these infrastructure conversations or the people conversations, how might we, that kind of opportunity is worth building towards. It's worth building towards domestically. Those kinds of energy systems, they will be solved somewhere else if they're not solved here. Those kinds of opportunities will open somewhere else if they're not here. And we have the resources to be able to figure these things out. So I think it's worth investing in.
Thank you. I'm really grateful to all of you on behalf of Microsoft for the partnership that you've provided for us. And what I hope everybody takes away from this discussion is that community-first AI infrastructure isn't just about slogans, right? It's really about collaborating deeply and transparently and driving to win-win solutions that ensure local systems and people emerge stronger. So thank you to our panelists, and with that, I'll turn it back over to Brad to close us out.
Thank you. Well, let me just say thank you all for coming. I do think as we conclude, it's worth pausing and just reflecting on the fact that our everyday life is actually something made possible in terms of almost everybody's lifestyle based on things like a car, a subway, an airplane, a phone, a microwave oven, a washing machine, everything that you plug into the electrical sockets in your home. And yet none of that would be possible without advances and investment in infrastructure. Here we go again with the next wave of technology. It will, in our opinion, improve healthcare, lead to medical discoveries, be a fundamental driver of productivity and economic growth. But it too requires infrastructure. And I think what you have heard from this panel is it's both a national issue, but it's really a local issue. For Leesburg, Virginia, or Cheyenne, Wyoming, or Quincy, Washington, or in town after town where the North American building trades unions are skilling and working with and representing the people who build all of this, who frankly build everything on which modern life relies. The challenges are never easy. They never have been. They're challenging again. And the only way to make this work is for everybody to come together and rely on that one word that Brian mentioned, communication. It's paramount here in Washington, D.C., and it's paramount where the rubber meets the road in the town and village councils across the country. We're excited about where this can go, but even more than that, we're committed to that focus on communication, on listening, learning, acting, and building trust. Thank you very much. Thanks.